Welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about struggles and celebrations that leaders and entrepreneurs experience on their journey to success. I'm your host, Kristina, and I'm passionate about helping you achieve massive amounts of success at work and at home. We'll talk about all things people and organizational wellness, share relatable stories, and feature insightful guests because quality people and processes are at the heart of every success story. Ready to learn, grow, and have fun? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Kristina Schmidt. We're going to talk today about accountability, which I know we've talked about before, but I want to talk about accountability with accompaniment. So accompanied accountability. So you're probably saying, what in the world is that? Because I did just make it up. Maybe I've stolen it from somewhere else. I don't know, but I've been making it up and using it the last few days with myself just to clarify what I'm talking about. So it might be a new phrase. So hey, there you go. But what I'm talking about here is that we talk a lot about feedback. Like I've talked on episodes on giving feedback. My last episode was on receiving feedback. We've talked about positive feedback, constructive feedback. So all kinds of feedback. But the key part that is probably the harder part to do is that feedback isn't just about the conversation that you have that one time. Feedback is a continued walking with somebody. So when you're really trying to develop your team members or develop, maybe your kids or develop yourself, you need to walk with that person because that person is learning. And that's why you're giving them feedback, right? You give somebody feedback because maybe an expectation isn't met, or maybe you're trying to raise the expectation as well. And you're trying to say, okay, well, you've been doing it at this level. Now I think you can do better. But that's a learning gap. So that basically introduces chaos into the system. It introduces frustration into the system, and it requires work from both parties, both the leader and the team member or coach and coachee. So before we get into it too much, I want to touch on something that I've shown these slides before in the delegate, like how to delegate right episode. So this was last year sometime, I believe, but we have gone through them before, but they apply here because it is about learning. So delegation, feedback, change management, every single thing that we're doing, we're changing and we're learning. So somebody is learning something. So you're going to go through the same process no matter what. So we might as well get really good at knowing what it is, how to assess where we are in it, how to assess where our team member is in it, so then we can better help them. So I'm going to show you some slides to kind of walk through this learning process. But before I do that, let's talk through normal feedback. Like, what do we normally see when we give feedback? So a lot of times, my typical feedback conversation that I'll hear from somebody, it's like, okay, yep, I brought him in, I told him what was not going well, and then that person is going to go do something different. Perfect, done. Right? That's not accompanied accountability. That is like, here you go. Here's your feedback. Now go figure it out. Kind of the sink or swim sort of level. Many of us, including myself, have experienced that really on both ends. And it works sort of. And at some point it will work and will be okay. But typically, and for most of your team members, it's not going to be okay. And especially if this person is relatively new in their role, or you're trying to upskill them and promote them, they're going to need more accompaniment. And as I show you the slides that we're going to go through in a moment, you'll see at what point they're going to be more capable of getting the feedback that we normally would do and taking it on their own and not needing as much accompaniment and maybe just a couple of check-ins. All right, so let's jump into those slides and see what they look like so that you get a view of what I have. So if you're on audio only, I will describe it as much as possible. If you're on the YouTube channel, then you get to see what I see. So this is what we call the learning cycle. We go through this every single time we change, every single time we're learning something new. In the last episode, I talked about how the learning space or the learning cycle is very messy. It can be very frustrating. It has lots of ups and downs, that sort of thing. So because it creates the chaos. But here's a more, concrete process of what is actually happening. Again, like many processes, you don't just necessarily flow right through it, right? You're going to have some movements around the cycle, but overall, you will progress through this cycle. So the first stage is actually in the lower right-hand corner, and it's called unconscious incompetence. So I always like to start and explain this with driving, because this is like the thing that most of us do and that most of us are in the final stage at. So that really helps a lot. So this unconscious incompetence. So think about your toddler. So think about a child. What they think of as driving is like grabbing the steering wheel and turning it, right? That is driving to them. So this is an unconscious incompetence. They have no idea what they don't know. So they're incompetent at the skill and they don't realize all of the pieces of it. Once they start learning, so your 14, 15-year-old, they've been observing a bit more, they are starting to actually drive. Now they're conscious about it, but they're still incompetent. So maybe it's your 12-year-old, right? Your 11 and 12-year-old who, they can drive a bike, but a car is going to be a different animal. Now you move into the conscious competence. So this is your 14, 15, 16-year-old. So the new driver, new level. So they're competent. They can do it now, but they're very consciously thinking about everything they're doing. So think driver's training. So you're thinking about, okay, how much do I have to brake as I approach this corner, that kind of a thing, and making sure, so they're still going to make mistakes and they're still going to have problems. Then finally you move to the unconscious competence, which is the lower left-hand corner. So for those not on the YouTube, it kind of goes into a U-shaped, upside down U sort of shape around this box. This unconscious incompetence, or this unconscious competence. So that is where most of us are with driving, with like reading, with doing math, with all of those things that are kind of like basic things that we do every single day. It's that autopilot level. And that's where you kind of could just run with it. So that is the stage at which most of us try to give people feedback with. So there will be times when you can give feedback at that level. So this feedback where it's like, hey, this isn't quite right. What are you going to do with it? Okay, awesome. You go do that thing. There will be levels of feedback and there will be times when that kind of correction is doable. So it's usually smaller things or somebody who, again, is very competent with their job, even to the point of I've got a center circle, this reflective competence where they can actually teach it to somebody and break it down. Even to that level. However, most of the time, and especially when you're trying to raise expectations, so raise the bar, you're going to go through this whole learning cycle all over again. Even a 30-year employee will go through this learning cycle because you're now putting something new in place. So you're saying, okay, well, let's say you're introducing a new system. So you have been using System A for 30 years. Now I'm going to introduce you to System B. And that is going to cause a whole lot of chaos for this person. Like, yes, they've been doing the job of, say, processing orders for a number of years, but now you're changing the tool. So they're back to this unconscious incompetence. They have no idea how to use the tool and they're incompetent in doing it. It is a slightly smaller level of incompetence because they understand the overall process. So in theory, they'll go through the process quicker. But this is all new stuff. So they're going to go through all of those same processes. They'll move into this conscious incompetence where maybe you've shown them how to do it. Then they'll move into the conscious competence where they could probably do it themselves with the steps right next to them. And then eventually they'll be able to do it while they're talking to somebody. Okay, so that's that unconscious competence. So when I talk about this with feedback, this is where we're going to come in and talk about accompanying people along that journey. So let's say we have an employee and this employee has they've been with the company maybe 3 years or so. So relatively new, but knows their job. Definitely at this unconscious competence level for the bulk of their work. But now you want them to upskill, or you've seen them sliding backwards a little bit. So one or the other usually. But this is when the feedback, it becomes more challenging because it is not just a one and done thing. Because now this person, you're asking them to do better or do it more detailed or do it at a higher level than they've been before. So that is going to throw them back into that unconscious incompetence because they've been doing it at the one level, and now you're asking them to do it to a different standard or a different expectation. So that's the feedback. Like basically, they're not aware of it yet. So you still have to give them feedback, right? You still have to say, okay, so I've noticed, let's say the person, like their quality of work maybe hasn't sped up as much as you or hasn't improved to the level that you would like it to. So they've been doing their job. It was all fine, but now it's not fine anymore because they're not new. And so you're like, so you've got to come in and say, give them that feedback basically. And the key is we don't want to be telling them a random story. We don't want to be like lying to them about things because ultimately what we're trying to do is build the trust so that they feel safe coming to us when they struggle and feel safe coming to us like if they're having troubles, if they've run into a snafu, if they've really screwed up, like we need them to trust us enough to come to us and know that it's okay. However, we're still going to hold them accountable. So there's a balance there of like softy versus not softy, but being open and firm about it. So there is that level of assertive accountability as well. I'm going to make a whole bunch of A's, make this a whole thing. So again, how do we accompany them through this process? So let's say they're not performing up to the standard we would expect after 2 or 3 years of employment. Okay, so you have the same conversation. So our basic feedback process or our basic elements are, this is what I expect, this is what I've observed, now let's talk about it. That's essentially what we want to do. Then we'll set the action and follow up. So that's kind of the whole overall process. Now, what you'll do when you have this first conversation, let's say it's kind of been going on, you may have noticed it, but you haven't said anything. Okay, so it's kind of feels chronic. All right, so what you want to do is you want to grab one instance, or you want to grab like the lump of same types of instances and say, okay, not you. So don't use you. So you want to look at it, but you need to prepare yourself in what this conversation is going to look like. But you want to, let's say that you've been seeing some errors come through the work. So you can say, hey, I've been observing a lot of errors coming out of your work. And I would have expected you at this point in your tenure here to catch those. What's going on? And just leave it there. I have a tendency to want to fill in some gaps there, but just leave it there. What's going on? Or how is it going? How's the work going? Or just ask a question and let it sit. It will feel hard. I promise you, because it feels hard right now. I want to fill in all the words right now. All right, but it will feel hard. Just let them talk. And then this is when you put your curiosity cap, your detective hat on, and start asking some questions. So they might say, well, I just didn't notice it. Okay, well, tell me more about that. And then they're going to say something else. And, it might come around to, are you checking your work? Are you reading it over? Are you testing it before you send it along or whatever it is? And you can start to ask those questions and then they're going to have to give you an answer. So they may say, yeah, I'm checking it, but I'm not catching it. Okay, well, let's check something together and let's see what you're working on or what you're catching. Cause I know you can do this. You've done it. I just want to make sure that you're capable of it because I want to do more. Like, I know you can do more, or I know you can do better. So it depends on the conversation, right? But, you're encouraging them, but what you're trying to do is open up that trust gate so that they're not afraid and feeling threatened around this feedback that you're giving them. Like it's hard to hear. You might have to be empathetic saying, hey, I know it's hard to hear this. If you're struggling with this and the person's not receiving well, go listen to my last episode. But you might have to be and say, I hear that this is hard to hear and I want you to be very successful. So let's dig in. Let's figure out what's going on. So ultimately, it typically will come down to skill or will. So either they don't have a skill set that you would like them to have, or they don't have the will or the want to do that work or the want to work at it that hard. Both are fixable, but sometimes there's limits on how much people are willing to fix. And this is where the accompaniment becomes more critical. Because if it's a skill set thing, you can accompany them and see where these gaps are, because maybe there's something that is on your autopilot that isn't on their autopilot. But there's also a gap of, there is a capability limit on people, or leading into working geniuses, there's a working genius and working frustration element that comes in. to give an example, because I love to give my lack of tenacity example, if I was being asked to send off like a perfectly written like code or a perfectly worked out, no errors whatsoever document every single day, multiple times a day, I would have many errors. Most humans would. Granted, ChatGPT makes it simpler, but if I had to do that kind of level of detail work all the time, I would hit my limit of will and likely some level of skill that I would bump into with being effective in that level. So taking into account and having those conversations around, hey, I know your genius is tenacity and you still need to provide error-free work. What's something that we can do to make sure, what's something you can do to make sure that it's error-free? Like those are the conversations you have to have. So you've made it open, you've clarified the expectation, and you've shown some empathy and saying, I know this is hard for you, and what's something that will work. So that's kind of around skill, but it can also lean into that will part. Because again, if it's a frustration for someone, the will be the challenge. Again, I'll lean on my lack of tenacity here. If I had a boss, I would love to be able to have the conversation like, hey, I am stuck in tenacity work this entire week. Can I get some extra check-ins? Or like, can I have some extra like breathing room? Or is there a small project I can participate in midweek that won't take too much time or thought process to help me re-energize through this week? And granted, not everyone's going to be as knowledgeable about their own geniuses, but if you are knowledgeable about their geniuses, about their past history, about their skill set, you can help them to see that as well. Now, there still could be a lack of will that has nothing to do with genius, has nothing to do with skill, has a lot to do with just actual motivation. So this is when the conversation becomes harder, but that building of trust becomes more necessary and more valuable, because you can have a really key conversation and just kind of say, how are you feeling about your work? And how are you feeling about what you do every day? How do you feel at the end of the day? And just start to dig into some of those questions with them through these conversations, because ultimately, not every job works for every person. Everybody is capable and very capable of doing work, but not every job's a good fit. Like if I had to be an accountant, I would not be a good fit. I would make mistakes. If I had to be a teacher of preschool children, I would also have issues. I would probably be very frustrated and angry, because that is like super duper galvanizing all day long, and I would be drained by the end of the day. So there are times when our frustrations and geniuses or just the overall work is going to frustrate us. There's also times when our leadership styles might frustrate that person too. So perhaps we tend to kind of talk in gray areas. So like we kind of give people ideas like, hey, well, I think I want to do this, and you can kind of hone it in here. And let's say we don't give them like very clear instructions. Some people will love that, and some people will hate that. And it's important to understand if you're the problem. You as the leader is the problem, because there are things that you can do and actions you can take to help, or maybe a change in environment is the right answer for that. So there's a lot of things that will come from these one conversations, and typically it is more conversations. The key is like, especially if we're talking about somebody who has been there 2 or 3 years and the work level's declining. So there's a demotivation factor that's probably in there. So digging into that, building the trust through those conversations and taking small actions with them are going to be key to walking with them. Let me say that it's a little bit easier, to walking with your team member through that development and through that learning and through that growth and those changes that you're asking them to make. So again, those changes could help them and move them up, because maybe you've discovered through these multiple conversations that they're super frustrated with their partner they have to work with, or they're super frustrated with looking at this spreadsheet all day long. Like that's hard for them. Okay, if the person is a great employee and fits the culture, then it's worth trying to discover, how can we get you out of the spreadsheet and working with others and talking to people? Or opposite, let's say they're being asked to work on a team or lead a bunch of meetings all day long, and all they want to do is live in the spreadsheet. okay, we can work with that if they're a good fit, if they fit the culture, if they're a good worker overall. It can also help to identify if there are bigger problems that maybe you can't help them with. So the bigger problems might be, that's the nature of this work. This work and this job and this role, and all I have is staring at the spreadsheet all day work. That's what it is. So maybe you'd be happier somewhere else. Or it could be that maybe this person doesn't fit the culture. So having a really clear understanding of what your work values are and how you expect people to behave in the workplace, these are really key, because you can, give some feedback all you want, but ultimately if the person doesn't fit the culture and it's not working, they're going to be less frustrated and you're going to be less frustrated if everybody moves forward in whatever direction that is. You want to be able to have these conversations well. And the whole way of doing that is to have a lot of the feedback conversations where you give the very quick feedback at the beginning, those 3 steps that I told you, and then just talk. Like, have some good, I call it a coaching conversation, but essentially what you're doing is you're getting curious, not in a offensive sort of way, but in a curious, empathetic sort of way. And then continue to have those as you move forward. And you will need to start to assess, okay, what kind of answers am I getting? At what point where's the milestone? Where's the checkpoint? So there will always be like a limit of, okay, they're still not getting it. I've been empathetic. We've dug into a bunch of things. And that's when you have the conversation, like, how is work going? How is this overall job going? Where are you frustrated? What's frustrating you? And that's when you can still start to really dig into that and get the best overall outcome, both for the team member and for yourself and the company. So I hope that clarifies how to walk with somebody. There is definitely more to it. There's a lot of relationship building and conversations in between these conversations that are going to make these accountability and feedback conversations go more smoothly. Because the more we touch base, the more we're very honest, and the more we can be empathetic and supportive, the better the ability to have conflict or the ability to give hard feedback will be. And the better you'll be able to help move them along those learning curves faster and really uncover will or skill. So this can be tough to do. This, as a leader, holding someone's hand through it can be a challenge because it takes time. It takes your energy. It might not be within your genius level to want to walk with somebody. So that's something that you'll have to work through as well. And it is better working it through with, if you have a boss, with your boss, and if you don't have a boss, with an external coach or some kind of a mentor or helper. And that is what I do with many of my clients. So if you are finding that you're having you have some difficult feedback conversations, you've got some employees that gosh, I know they can do better, then reach out to me, because I can help accompany you while you're accompanying them. And that will help the whole team get better and really make it more effective workplace and more effective team, and help everyone go home and not be bringing their home frustrations or bringing their work frustrations into their home life, because that is how we get burnt out. And that is where we really, really struggle in life. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please like it, share it with a friend, leave a review, or leave a comment on the YouTube video. And I hope you enjoyed reaching out or having the discussion today and thinking about it, and you will take this and move it forward with your team. And again, I will see you on the next episode of the Business Building Blocks podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Building Blocks podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. If you found value in our conversation, please leave a quick review, like, or share. It helps us reach more amazing listeners like you. For more resources and insights, visit KristinaSchmidt.ca, where you can find tools and support to empower your leadership journey. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.